My name is Daniel, and I've always seen myself as a man of simple truths. Someone who finds purpose in the steady rhythm of family, work, and the traditions that have shaped me. I'm not one for chasing thrills or navel-gazing. Life to me is about showing up, putting in the effort, and holding tight to what's mine. But there's one weekend that upended all of that. A stretch of days that started with the comfort of habit and ended with me questioning everything I thought I knew about myself. I'm not here to beg for forgiveness or fish for sympathy. I'm telling this because it's a weight I can't shake, a story that clings to me like the scent of wood smoke, and I suspect it always will. Every November, when the leaves have fallen and the air turns crisp, deer season kicks off. A ritual I've held dear since I was a kid trailing my dad through the woods. It's not just about the hunt. It's a reset, a chance to step away from the grind and breathe deep in the wild. My wife, Sarah, and I usually make the trip together to our cabin, a rough-hewn hideaway tucked into 15,000 acres of Arkansas forest. We've spent years carving out that land, cutting trails, sowing feed plots, turning a bare-bones shack into a refuge. It's our place, built with sweat and time, where we've shared quiet mornings and late-night talks by the fire. But this year the plan shifted. It came up over dinner a few weeks back. Nothing fancy, just roast chicken and green beans, the kind of meal we've had 100 times. Sarah set her fork down mid-bite and said she couldn't come this time. She'd been picked for a healthcare policy conference in Little Rock, a big deal for her career, and I couldn't argue with the pride in her eyes. Still, the thought of heading out alone, especially with my birthday falling on opening day, hit me harder than I expected. I've always liked my own company out there when I choose it, but this felt different, empty almost. Sarah, though, had other ideas. "You're not going by yourself," she said, her voice firm. It wasn't just stubbornness. She'd been on edge since I'd had a dizzy spell a few months earlier. The doc chalked it up to stress, told me to drink more water, but Sarah wasn't taking chances. Her fix? Ellie. Ellie was a nurse from Sarah's hospital, a face I'd seen at picnics and Christmas parties. Bright, talkative, maybe 10 years my junior. She'd gone through a divorce not long ago, and beneath her sunny demeanor, I could sense the strain she tried to hide. Sarah figured Ellie could use a getaway, and I could use the company, 2 birds, 1 stone. She pitched it like a win-win. I wouldn't be solo, and Ellie could try her hand at hunting. I wasn't sold. The woods were my quiet, my space to think, and dragging along a newbie, someone who probably couldn't tell a deer track from a tire mark, sounded like work, not a break. But Sarah's insistence wore me down, her hand squeezing mine across the table, and I grumbled a reluctant, "Fine." Friday came fast, and I pulled into Ellie's driveway as the sun dipped low, my truck's engine growling in the stillness. Sarah had told me to honk, rude by my standards, but I obliged. The front door flew open, and there she was, framed by the glow of her porch light, hauling enough gear to outfit a platoon. "Hey, Daniel," she called, her voice cutting through the evening chill as she wrestled with duffels and a cooler. I stepped out to help, eyeing the heap. "You expecting a siege?" I asked, hefting a bag into the bed. She laughed, brushing hair from her face. Sarah said to be ready for anything. I might have overpacked. The drive was a 2-hour haul through twisting roads, the kind that wind past farms and forests until civilization fades in the rearview. Ellie talked the whole way, hospital gossip, her ex's latest stunt, a funny story about a kid she patched up who'd swallowed a toy soldier. It was a barrage of sound I hadn't signed up for, but her energy had a pull, lightening the mood despite myself. By the time we rolled up to the cabin, the moon was up, casting a pale wash over the clearing. I got to work, flipping the generator, lighting the wood stove, while Ellie hauled her stuff to the loft. The place warmed quick, the familiar smell of pine and smoke settling my nerves. I dropped into the armchair, flipped on an old Western, John Wayne, Dusty Trails, the usual, and tried to ease into the night. Then her voice floated down. "Okay if I shower?" she asked, casual as can be. "Sure," I said, barely glancing up from the screen. The water started, a low drone through the walls, and I focused on the movie, the clatter of gunfire a welcome distraction. But then the stairs creaked. I looked up, instinct nothing more, and stopped cold. Ellie was crossing the room in a towel, a scrap of fabric that barely reached her thighs, her wet hair dripping down her back. She didn't flinch, just padded toward the kitchen, the towel shifting with every step. My eyes stuck for a second too long before I jerked them back to the TV, my pulse thudding. This wasn't part of the plan. The shower cut off after a while, and I kept my stare locked on the screen, ignoring the rustle from the bathroom. When she came back, she'd traded the towel for sweatshorts and a crop tank, loose but not enough to hide much. She flopped onto the couch, plunking an empty jam jar on the table. "Ready for tomorrow?" I asked, aiming for normal. "Yep," she said, grinning as she tapped the jar. "Need this later." I raised a brow but didn't push. Her quirks weren't my business. "Thanks for this," she added, her tone softening. "Sarah made it sound amazing." "I'm pumped." I nodded, forcing a smile. "It's a good spot. Quiet. You'll like it." She stretched out, legs curling under her, and the motion tugged her shirt up, flashing a strip of skin. I looked away fast, my chest tightening. We talked hunting for a bit, how to sit still, what gear she'd need, the patience it takes. She listened, nodding, her hazel eyes catching mine too often, a faint smile playing at her lips. It wasn't flirty, not exactly, but it set my nerves jangling. The fire crackled, casting shadows, and she stretched again, her top riding higher. I swallowed hard, feeling the edge of something I didn't want to name. "Gonna hit the sack," she said finally, grabbing her jar and heading upstairs. "Night, Daniel. This is already great." I watched her go, her shape disappearing into the loft, and exhaled slow. Sleep was going to be a fight tonight. The alarm ripped me awake at 4:30, the cabin dark and cold, the fire long dead. I stumbled out of bed, the floor like ice under my feet, and layered up thermals, camo, the routine grounding me. My head was thick with half-remembered images. Ellie, that towel, her smile. I shoved it down. Today was the hunt, period. "Ellie, up and at him," I called, my voice rough. A groggy okay drifted back, and I turned to the kitchen, brewing coffee and frying bacon. The smell cut through the haze, steadying me as I plated food. The stairs groaned, and I turned, expecting her geared up. Instead, my breath caught. Ellie was strolling down, buck naked, hair damp from another shower, moving like it was nothing. "Morning," she said, "breezy as you please," heading for the fridge. I spun back to the stove, heat flooding my face. "Morning," I muttered, staring at the bacon like it'd save me. She grabbed a jar, jam again, leaning over the counter, and I gripped the spatula, knuckles white. "You, might want a dress," I said, voice strained. "It's freezing out there." She laughed, light and teasing. "Chill, Daniel. It's just me." I didn't look until her steps faded upstairs. When she came back, she was in camo, ready to roll like the whole thing hadn't happened. She grabbed a plate, chattering about the hunt, but I could barely focus, the air between us buzzing. We ate quick, loaded the ATV, and she climbed on behind me, arms tight around my waist. The engine roared as we cut through the woods, her warmth pressing into me, unavoidable. We hit the blind at dawn, and I handed her a rifle. "Safety first," I said, clipped. She nodded, eager, and followed me in. Whatever this was turning into, I was already losing the reins. Equals. The forest was a silent sprawl as we hiked to the blind, the pre-dawn chill biting at my face. Ellie trailed close behind, her boots scuffing the carpet of leaves, her rifle slung over her shoulder like she'd been doing this for years. I glanced back once just to make sure she wasn't lagging, and caught her scanning the trees, her breath fogging in the dim light. She'd surprised me, adaptable, steady, and it threw me off more than I cared to admit. The blind came into view, a weathered box on stilts nestled among the pines, and I climbed up, holding the door for her. She slipped inside, settling onto the bench beside me, her presence shrinking the space in a way I wasn't used to. I handed her the rifle, keeping my tone sharp to cut through the haze in my head. "Barrel downrange, don't load till you're set." "Got it." She nodded, her grip firm as she adjusted the stock against her shoulder. The sun was just breaking the horizon, spilling faint gold across the clearing, a sight that usually steadied me, but not today. My pulse thrummed loud in the quiet, and I couldn't pin it on the hunt alone. We sat still, the silence wrapping around us, but it wasn't the calm I craved. It was taut, charged, like a bowstring pulled tight. Ellie shifted, her knee grazing mine, and I tensed, pretending it didn't register. She seemed oblivious, her eyes fixed on the windows, watching the woods wake up. "It's so quiet out here," she whispered after a stretch, her voice soft enough to blend with the rustle of leaves outside. "Yeah," I said, staring straight ahead. "That's what makes it special." She smiled, barely a flicker. "Thanks for letting me tag along, Daniel." I know I'm not your usual partner. I shrugged, the edge in me softening despite myself. Gotta start somewhere. Time dragged, the air warming as the sun climbed higher. I tried to lock in, scanning for movement, listening for snaps, but Ellie kept pulling my focus. She tugged off her jacket, muttering about the heat, her tank top clinging in a way that made my throat tighten. I gripped my rifle, forcing my eyes to the clearing. Then I caught it. A shadow shifting near the tree line. I nudged her, pointing low. Buck by the edge. See it? She raised her rifle, slow and deliberate, tracking the deer as it nosed through the underbrush. Wait till it's broadside, I murmured. Clean shot, right behind the shoulder. She nodded, her breath shallow. The buck turned, antlers glinting in the light, perfect. She pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. The deer bolted, crashing into the brush, gone. Ellie let out a frustrated huff, dropping the gun. Forgot to chamber, she said, her voice tight. It's fine, I lied, swallowing my own letdown. Next time. She leaned back, peeling off her long-sleeve layer, leaving just the tank. Too warm in here, she grumbled, stretching her arms. I nodded, distracted, but the blind was turning into a pressure cooker. And it wasn't just the sun. Her bare shoulders, the damp hair sticking to her neck. It was a slow burn I couldn't douse. I shifted away, fiddling with my scope like it mattered. You sit out here all day like this? She asked, her tone light again. Pretty much, I said. Builds patience. She tilted her head, eyeing me. You're good at that. Steady. It's calming. I grunted a vague reply, hoping she'd let it drop. She didn't. Ever get lonely, though? She pressed, quieter now. I paused, caught off guard. Sometimes. But it's part of it. Her gaze held mine, steady and warm, and that smile crept back, small, unreadable. Well, I'm here now, she said, a hint of play in her voice. My mouth went dry. Yeah, I managed, looking away. She leaned closer, her fingers brushing my sleeve. A feather-light touch that hit like a jolt. You don't mind, do you? She asked, her voice dropping low. I shook my head too fast. No, the air thickened, humming with something I couldn't dodge. She touched my arm again, intentional this time, and I froze. I'm glad I'm here, she said, her eyes locked on mine. Even if it's different without Sarah. Her name, Sarah, punched through me, but I nodded, throat tight. Glad you're here too. The words came out heavy, loaded with something I couldn't reel back. She smiled, leaning in, and I felt it, a pull I couldn't fight. Ellie, I started, my voice rough, but her hand found my cheek, soft and sure. You don't have to say anything, she whispered. And I didn't. I closed the gap instead, her lips meeting mine, and everything else, the woods, the hunt, the rules, fell away. It started hesitant, like we were testing the edge, waiting for one of us to pull back. But then she pressed closer, her hand sliding to my neck, and I caved. My arms wrapped around her, the rifle clattering to the floor, forgotten. Guilt flared Sarah's face, her trust, but Ellie's touch smothered it, her breath warm against me. This is wrong, I rasped, pulling back just enough to feel her forehead against mine. Maybe, she whispered, unsteady. But does it feel wrong? I couldn't answer. It didn't. It felt raw, alive, like waking up after years half asleep. She searched my eyes. Tell me to stop and I will. I should have said it. I didn't. Don't, I said, and she kissed me again, harder, and the line I'd clung to dissolved. We stayed there, tangled in the blind, time slipping into a blur of heat and need. Her fingers traced my jaw, my hands found her waist. Every touch a spark I couldn't resist. The forest faded. The deer didn't matter. It was just us, the air thick with something reckless and real. When the chill finally seeped in, she shivered, and I pulled away, reality clawing back. We should head in, I said, my voice ragged. She nodded, her head resting on my shoulder a moment longer, her arms tight around me. I don't want this to stop, she murmured. It doesn't have to, I said, the words escaping before I could catch them. She smiled, faint and fierce, and we climbed down, the weight of it sinking in. The ride back was quiet, her arms locked around me on the ATV. Her warmth a steady pulse against my back. At the cabin we stoked the fire and sat across from each other, the logs crackling in the stillness. She watched me over her coffee, her gaze steady but guarded. This changes everything, doesn't it? She asked, her voice small. I nodded, the truth settling like stone. Yeah, it does. The fire burned low, shadows stretching long, and I knew nothing. Not the cabin, not me would feel the same again. Equals. The cabin felt like a cage that night, the walls pressing in as the fire flickered down to a dull glow. Ellie sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of instant coffee, her knees pulled up tight. Her eyes darted to me every few seconds, quick and wary, like she was waiting for me to break the silence first. It hung between us, thick and heavy, loaded with the echoes of what we'd done in the blind. My mind kept circling back. The heat of her lips, the way she'd looked at me like I was more than just the guy who keeps the wheels turning. But now in the fading light, that rush was curdling into something bitter, guilt, dread, a gnawing ache I couldn't shake. We gotta talk, I said finally, my voice slicing through the quiet. She set her mug down slow, her fingers lingering on the rim, and met my gaze. I know, she said, barely audible. I just don't know where to begin. I leaned forward, elbows digging into my knees, staring at the floorboards. What happened out there? It's over. It can't happen again. Her lips pressed tight, and for a second I thought she'd argue, but she nodded, her eyes dropping to her hands. I get it, she said, her voice small. I knew it was wrong even while it was happening. But, I pressed, catching the hitch in her tone. She twisted her sleeve, hesitating. But it felt right, Daniel. Like something I've been missing for so long. I didn't want it to end. Her words landed hard, mirroring the truth I'd been dodging. I'd felt it too, that spark, that jolt of being seen, wanted, alive. It hit me the same way. I admitted, my throat tight. But that doesn't make it okay. We crossed a line, Ellie, one we can't uncross. Her eyes shimmered and she swiped at them fast, like she could hide the tears. I didn't mean to screw things up for you, she said, her voice breaking. I thought this was just a trip hunting, a distraction. Not this. Neither did I said, the weight settling deeper. But it's done, and if Sarah finds out. I stopped, the thought too raw to finish. Her face, her trust, the life we'd built. It'd all collapse. Ellie nodded, firm now. I won't tell. It stays here. It has to, I said, my tone hard. No slips, no second chances. This stops now. She swallowed, her agreement silent but clear. The fire popped, a log crumbling to ash, and we sat there, the space between us cold and vast. She stood after a while, arms crossed tight, and moved to the stairs. I'm turning in, she said, not looking back. Night. I watched her climb, her steps heavy, and when she vanished into the loft, I dropped my head into my hands, the guilt crashing over me like a wave. Sleep was a lost cause. I sprawled on the couch, staring at the ceiling, the cabin's familiar groans taunting me. Every time I shut my eyes, Ellie flickered in, her touch, her smile, the way she'd pulled me under. Then Sarah, her voice, her steady presence, the years we'd stitched together. I'd betrayed her, no dodging that, and for what? A fleeting high? A patch on a hole I hadn't even noticed? Dawn crept in, slow gray light seeping through the windows, and I dragged myself up, moving on autopilot, coffee, packing, the motions of escape. Ellie came down later, quiet, her eyes puffy but dry. We loaded the truck without a word. The drive back a stark, silent stretch compared to her chatter on the way out. Home hit like a reset, but I was off kilter. Sarah met me at the door, her arms wrapping around me, her conference tales tumbling out. New policies, late-night debates, all of it bright in her voice. I nodded, smiled, played along, but every look at her stabbed me with what I'd risked. Ellie slipped back into the background, Sarah's coworker, a polite nod at hospital gatherings. We never spoke of it, never crossed paths alone. The cabin felt different after that, though. Next season I went solo, and the woods were hollow, the blind a shadow of that morning. I'd stuck to my promise. No repeats, no cracks, but the cost lingered, a quiet bruise I couldn't touch. Looking back, it's sharp and clear. Choices ripple farther and deeper than you see coming. That weekend I let temptation override sense, and it nearly torched everything. My marriage, my peace, who I thought I was. Boundaries aren't just lines, they're guardrails. If there's an emptiness gnawing at you, some need you can't name, the fix isn't in stolen moments. It's in facing it square with the people who count. Trust is fragile as hell, and I came too close to breaking it. I'm still sorting out what's left of me after that, but one thing's locked in. I won't let it happen again. The price is too steep. The weeks after rolled by in a blur. Life snapping back into its old grooves. Work, dinners with Sarah, the usual. But I carried it, a silent weight in my chest. Every laugh of hers a reminder of how close I'd come to losing it all. Ellie faded into the edges of our world, her name popping up in Sarah's stories now and then. But we never locked eyes, never traded more than a curt nod. It was like an unspoken pact. Bury it, leave it in the woods. The cabin stayed quiet that winter, the gear gathering dust, and when spring hit, I found excuses to skip the usual upkeep trips. The place didn't feel like ours anymore. It was tainted, a marker of my stumble. Sarah noticed something was off, though she never pinned it down. "You okay?" she'd ask over coffee, her brow creasing. "Just tired," I'd say, dodging her gaze. It wasn't a lie, not really. Exhaustion clung to me, the kind that comes from wrestling yourself every night. I'd lie awake replaying it all, the blind Ellie's touch, the moment I let go. Guilt chewed at me, but so did something else. That flicker of feeling alive, of maturing in a way I hadn't in years. It was a traitor's thought and I hated it, hated how it lingered like a splinter I couldn't pull. Months later, I went back to the cabin alone, forcing myself to face it. The air was thick with summer heat, the blind sagging under neglect. I sat there, rifle in hand, staring at the clearing, but no deer came. It wasn't about the hunt anymore. It was about proving I could reclaim the space, strip it of her shadow. It didn't work. The memory stuck, sharp as ever, and I left early, the silence louder than before. Sarah asked how it went when I got home, her smile warm, and I mumbled, "Fine," hating the lie in my voice. She didn't push, just squeezed my hand, and that trust, unearned now, cut deeper than anything. What I've learned bone deep is this: actions don't vanish when the moment fades. They echo, they scar. I danced too close to the edge, let desire blur the lines, and it's a miracle I didn't fall. Loyalty's a fragile thread, and I nearly snapped it for a taste of something fleeting. If there's a void, a hunger, the answer's not out there in the woods with someone else. It's here in the hard work of facing what's real. I'm still Daniel, still Sarah's husband, still the guy who loves the hunt, but I'm carrying a crack now, a lesson etched in me. I won't cross that line again. Not because I'm strong, but because I know how weak I can be. That's the truth I live with, and it's enough to keep me straight.